Outlaws like the James Younger Gang made the American frontier a lawless place during the 1800s. But even without police or functioning courts, some kind of order had to exist for people to live at all out west. So how did justice work in the American West? Hi, and welcome to Frontier Justice, where we look at how the American West went from chaos to civilization. The year is 1876. You're a deputy sheriff in the boomtown of Abilene, Kansas. For over a year now, you and your fellow lawmen have patrolled the streets and maintained order. And so far, you've arrested more than 300 people, mostly for crimes of passion or public intoxication. But now the town has changed. A large group of cowboys just rode in with their cattle after a long drive up from Texas. They'll be staying here until it's time to ship their herd east. And while they're in town, one of them gets drunk and stumbles into a saloon brawl. As the fight breaks up, a man runs out, calling for help. He'd been stabbed and now he's bleeding badly. You rush to his side. He tells you that one of the cowboys did this to him. And as he utters his last words, he asks you to find his killer. This is your chance to make a name for yourself, but if you fail, the consequences could be dire. The story of frontier justice is one of crime and punishment, yes, but it's also one of opportunity. The American West was a dangerous and unpredictable place, but it was also a place where people could come to build new lives for themselves. Whether you were a rancher raising cattle, a miner searching for gold, or a lawman trying to bring order to a wild frontier, the opportunities on the frontier were endless. This led to a flood of immigrants heading west in search of a better life. And as the population grew, so did the need for law and order. When the United States acquired vast territories in the mid-19th century, there weren't any laws in place for these new lands. In fact, there weren't even any local governments. It wasn't until after the Civil War that the U.S. began to organize these territories, appointing judges and marshals to administer justice. Even then, there were very few of them. This left most of the law enforcement in the hands of volunteer posses and citizen groups. As we saw in previous episodes, unlike the rest of the country, the frontier had its own unique brand of justice. It was born of necessity. People who moved to the frontier were typically rugged individuals who were used to doing things their own way. They didn't want to be told what to do by a distant government, and they weren't about to wait around for help to arrive. If someone broke the law, they wanted justice served quickly, and they didn't care if that meant taking the law into their own hands. So how did people go about dispensing justice on the frontier? Well, it varied depending on the circumstances. In some cases, people took the law into their own hands. In a more literal sense, lynchings were common, as were tarring and feathering. Of course, these punishments were usually reserved for the most egregious offenses, like murder or rape. In other cases, people relied on a system of informal courts. These courts were usually presided over by respected members of the community, like ministers or business owners. They didn't have the authority of a real court, but they were able to impose fines and other penalties that were usually enough to deter people from breaking the law. In many ways, this was an efficient system. It allowed people to resolve disputes quickly and without the help of the government. It also gave people a sense of control over their environment. After all, when you make your own laws, you don't have to worry about being punished by a distant government for breaking them. But this system wasn't perfect. In fact, it was often downright brutal. It also tended to favor the wealthy and powerful. After all, if you're a member of the community, you're not going to impose a heavy fine on one of your own. Despite its flaws, though, this system worked for a while. The frontier was a rough and tumble place, but it was also a place where people could come to build new lives for themselves. They were willing to work hard, and they were willing to take risks. They were also willing to help each other out. The frontier was a close-knit community, and people looked out for one another. If someone was in trouble, whether they'd broken the law or were just in need of assistance, their neighbors were there to help them out. This sense of community was what made the frontier such a special place. It was a place where people could come to start over, where they could be their own bosses and make their own rules. It was also a place where people could come together and build something new. The frontier wasn't just a place of lawlessness and violence, it was also a place of hope and opportunity. Now let's return to our story. When the cowboy refused to apologize for getting into a fight, you and the other lawmen arrested him and threw him in jail. The next day, the jail was filled with angry cowboys threatening to tear the place down to get their friend out. You might have been outnumbered, but you knew you had the law on your side. Or maybe you sided with the cowboys because you'd grown tired of outsiders moving to town and turning Abilene into a city instead of a wide-open frontier. Maybe you hated the outsider who ran the saloon for selling whiskey that made people violent, or the rich landowners who cheated poor farmers out of their land. Or maybe you'd been assigned to defend the sanctity of the law, no matter the cost. Whatever your reasoning, you held firm. But would the citizens back you up? Your decision will affect not only the outcome of this story, but the entire future of the American frontier. The antebellum period saw a surge in westward expansion as Americans began to move beyond the settled lands of the East and into the vast territories of the West. This movement was driven by a variety of factors, including the desire for new economic opportunities, the quest for land and resources, and the lure of adventure. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 triggered a massive influx of settlers known as the Gold Rush, which dramatically increased the population of the western states. This rapid population growth led to the establishment of new settlements and towns, each of which needed a system of governance and law enforcement to maintain order and protect the rights of the settlers. The question is, who exactly was in charge of maintaining law and order in these fledgling communities? The answer is a combination of federal and local authorities. At the federal level, the U.S. government appointed judges and marshals to administer justice in the territories. However, due to the vast distances involved and the limited resources of the federal government, these officials were often unable to respond to local disputes and maintain order. As a result, much of the responsibility for law enforcement fell to local militias and volunteer posses. These groups were typically composed of ordinary citizens who were called upon to assist in maintaining order and protecting the community. Additionally, many frontier towns had jails, although these facilities were often rudimentary and subject to the whims of local officials. Some jails were little more than sheds or outbuildings, while others were more substantial structures made of wood or stone. The conditions in these jails varied widely, but they were generally overcrowded, unsanitary, and understaffed. Despite these challenges, those who worked in the justice system of the American frontier played a vital role in shaping the history of the West. Sheriffs and jailers were responsible for apprehending criminals, maintaining order, and protecting the rights of the settlers. Marshals, on the other hand, were charged with enforcing federal laws and protecting federal property. These individuals were often highly skilled and courageous, as they frequently had to deal with outlaws and dangerous criminals. One of the most infamous figures of frontier justice was Judge Roy Bean, who presided over a district that included 33 counties in Texas. Despite having no formal legal training, Bean was appointed to the bench in 1883 and became known for his eccentric rulings and colorful language. Another notable figure was Billy Tillman, who served as both a sheriff and jailer in the town of Glen Rio, Texas. Tillman was known for his ability to handle dangerous prisoners and his skill as a marksman. He once shot a prisoner who attempted to escape while handcuffed. On the other side of the law were outlaws and lawbreakers who challenged the authority of law enforcement and pushed the limits of frontier justice. One of the most notorious outlaws of the American frontier was Billy the Kid, who was involved in a number of shootouts with law enforcement officials. His legend has endured to this day, making him a popular subject in movies and television shows. Other famous outlaws include Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch and the James Younger Gang, who were known for their daring robberies and shootouts with law enforcement. The frontier was a complex and often contradictory place, balancing between lawlessness and attempts at creating order. It grappled with issues of race, gender roles, and economic inequality, reflecting the larger struggles of American society during this period. As the frontier evolved and the American West was tamed, the need for such drastic measures of frontier justice diminished. Eventually, well-established courts and law enforcement agencies replaced the ad hoc systems of the early days. But despite the disappearance of frontier justice as an official system, its legacy lived on in the popular imagination. The stories of legendary sheriffs, judges, and outlaws continued to be told and retold, becoming part of the fabric of American folklore. And as we've seen in our series, its impact can still be felt today. Thank you for watching this episode of Frontier Justice. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe and follow the law.